I bet you weren't expecting this.
Hey. So here's how it went down. I was about halfway done with my next booster shot upload, and I went to go see Dune Part 2 Sunday night. I wanted to see it sooner than that, but schedule and whatnot, I had to wait a little bit. And I immediately realized I had to talk about Dune 2 before I talked about my next booster shot, because Dune Part 2 is something special. It is something extraordinary. This is something that you need to see. You need to see it in theaters, and we're going to get to that later. But also, the first thing I'm going to talk about, it's in the title of the video, is seeing this with the right expectations. A lot of people have been saying that this is the greatest sci-fi epic of all time. Like, it's just, nothing comes close. And I think a lot of people are going to see that take, they're going to see that opinion and think, I mean, you're comparing it to Star Wars, man? Like, you're setting the bar high, and for some people, Dune might not really reach that bar, and maybe they're just going to not let it overwhelm their love of The Empire Strikes Back, and they're going to be like, man, this movie got overhyped, they're going to be disappointed, and they're going to not like it, they're not going to want to rewatch it, they might get a bad review. And I don't think that's fair, because comparing what is my favorite sci-fi movie of all time, The Empire Strikes Back, to Dune is like comparing Tom Brady to Jim Brown. They're both the greatest at what they played. Jim Brown was the greatest running back, arguably, of all time, and Tom Brady was easily the greatest quarterback of all time. They're both the greatest of all time, but they played different positions. Empire Strikes Back is a contained 2-hour movie that has a very specific story to tell. It is a fantastic movie, but it isn't an epic. Dune is an epic. This movie is grand. It is massive. The scale at which it tackles its stories and its themes and its world building and its characters, it's nothing I have ever seen before in the sci-fi genre. It's nothing we probably will ever see in the sci-fi genre, and it is truly remarkable. It is what I would consider it to be is like the Lord of the Rings of the sci-fi genre. It's based off a very, very well-known book, a very long book. Lord of the Rings had 3 movies for one book, technically, and Dune had 2 movies for one book, and that's how I view Dune. I view Dune as one movie. It's not part 1 and part 2, it is one movie. There's 2 types of part 2s. There's Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. They both wrapped up different stories. They both had different arcs. They both had different conclusions. They technically were a continuation of the same story, but it really did feel like a sequel. It felt like 2 different movies. Dune Part 1, I remember I really liked it. I did. But the biggest problem was that it felt incomplete. It felt unfinished. You can really tell that they had a script written out and they just cut it in half and they realized we need to stop here and we need to make this a 2-parter. And having a 2.5-year gap between these 2 movies is a huge detriment to Dune as a whole. I think now we can view these as one movie. We can watch them as one 5-hour long movie, a very long movie, but they really are now just a complete package that forms the most grand, overarching, and just fantastic story the sci-fi genre I think has ever seen in cinema. And it's not trying to be the next Star Wars. It doesn't want to take that title from Star Wars. It is something entirely different, and what it does is truly remarkable. So I am kind of struggling with how to set up this movie, because part 1 really is the setup to part 2. Everything that happens in part 2 is a continuation of part 1. So I'm actually not going to do any sort of setup. I'm not going to go into the plot at all because I don't want to spoil it for you. I want it to be fresh. I really want you to go into this fresh, ready to go. Part 1 is the setup. Part 1 is that build-up. It's not time wasted. It is time valuably spent setting up this world and these characters for what Part 2 inevitably delivers. So I'm going to touch on characters and actors. So Timothée Chalamet played a very good Paul Atreides in Dune Part 1. A Paul who was strong, but also he didn't want to be Duke. He didn't want to be a ruler. He didn't want that authority. And eventually in Part 2, he has to come to realize he is the Duke. He is the ruler, and he needs to rise up against the Harkonnens. I wasn't sure how he was going to play that. But man, the kind of performance Timothée Chalamet delivers in this movie is something I would expect from a very, very experienced actor, someone who is used to playing characters like these. It's not something I would expect from like a first effort. Timothée Chalamet absolutely owns this movie. He really commands presence. It is something I have really never seen from an actor this young and this unexperienced playing a character like this. Like, from such a little, young, skinny kid, the kind of power he has on screen is unlike anything I've ever seen. And it was really, I wasn't sure about the casting choice at first, But now I realize the director knew, like he knew what Timothée Chalamet could bring to this role, and what he brought was the Paul Atreides that I don't think anyone else could have played as well as he does. Next is Zendaya. This is a brief one because her character arc really hasn't played through all the way. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in part 3. But what she does in this movie is really well done. She's really good at acting her part in this movie. It really cemented the fact for me that her and Timothée Chalamet weren't cast because they were trending. They were cast because they were the right people for the roles. They have great chemistry. Watching them play off each other and watching their relationship ultimately push Paul towards the Duke he didn't want to be is something that I really enjoyed to watch, not gonna lie. I really did enjoy it. And it's a shame that she doesn't have the same chance to really power through her role that Timothée and Austin Butler do, but I see it coming and I know she's probably going to do a fantastic job. And coming back to Austin Butler, man, I'm becoming an Austin Butler fan, I'm not going to lie. If The Bike Riders delivers the same kind of Austin Butler I got from this movie and Elvis, he is slowly becoming one of my favorite actors. I've never seen a character portray this kind of menace and this kind of over-the-top evil the way he does. A lot of times it's kind of cartoony, but the way he is evil, the way he just kills people without even thinking about it, just because he's testing the sharpness of his blade. So, you know, it should be cartoony, but the way he does it is extraordinarily menacing, and he is a fantastic villain. He really overshadows the Baron, who was great in the first movie, but now he's kind of stepping aside for the new villain, which is Austin Butler, and his presence in this film is extraordinary. So that wraps up like the main characters. The supporting cast is really great too, and I'm not going to touch on plot or themes, but just trust me when I say the way this movie handles the plot and the themes and the way it carries it from part 1 to part 2 and the conclusion is just magnificent. It is truly, truly spectacular. If you're willing for that 5-hour long ride of just truly remarkable storytelling, I can guarantee you it is worth it. There's one scene in particular where I had the kind of goosebumps I haven't had in a movie since Endgame, that portal scene. I haven't had those kind of goosebumps in 5 years, but this movie gave them to me and it was really, really special. Moving on to world building, we didn't see that many planets in part 1. We see so many more in part 2. Trust me when I say that I'm not going to spoil any of them, but they're very distinct. They all have different color palettes, different architecture, different people, and just trying to figure out which ones are different, how they're different, like what sets them apart, who's in them, and their roles in the story is really cool. Like, I know they're just planets, but they're really cool planets, and they all kind of have their own little purpose, and that's the kind of stuff I really like in a sci-fi movie. And finally, I'm going to wrap this up with some CGI. Oh man, I wanted to see this in IMAX because I'd heard how magnificent the CGI was. I was not prepared, really, honestly, I was not. I could not actually physically have been ready for the kind of cinematic experience this movie delivers. I feel harsh for saying there's a lot of it, because when I say a lot of it, normally what we think of is like Ant-Man 3, where it's just overblown CGI barf fest, and you really just want it to stop, you want something practical. Dune really does a masterful job of blending practical and CGI. And I guess technically there is a lot of CGI, but what's incredible is that I never felt like I was really watching CGI, especially the sandworms, the spaceships, the battles. It really did just feel like the next step in cinematic CGI. It really felt like we were taking a next generation leap into what we can do and what we can show on the big screen. And I'm just going to say it, if you're going to see this movie and your theater, whatever the best quality screen at your theater is, IMAX, Big D, whatever, go see it in that. Honestly, I really do mean it. I know it's a little bit more money, a lot more money these days than just a normal ticket, but on a normal screen, this movie, you're not going to really comprehend and grasp just how cool and just how amazing this movie looks. A while back, I was rewatching the trailer for The Dark Knight, and one of the comments said, "I'm truly jealous of those who saw this in theaters." And I think that is the feeling that, you know, people my age, we look back on movies like The Dark Knight and The Lord of the Rings, and we just think, man, can you imagine being there? Can you imagine being there and not going to see this movie? I can only imagine what it would have been like to see this movie for the first time in theaters. And I think in 20 years, that's the way people are going to think of Dune Part 2. They're going to be watching it on their 8K OLED TVs because that's what's going to be affordable in 20 years. And they're just going to be thinking, you know what, I really wish I'd been there. And can you imagine being back when Dune Part 2 came out and not seeing this in theaters? And I mean, honestly, I do believe it. I do believe movies like this do not come around that often. I think they come around maybe once a decade, once every 2 decades, and not seeing them is a disservice to both you and the movie itself. Again, seeing it with the right expectations, knowing it's not trying to be the next Star Wars, but also realizing that what you're watching is something that's going to be rewatched for decades to come, and people are going to wish that they could have had the opportunity you have now to go see this movie in IMAX and just be in awe at what they have done and what they have put on that big screen for your enjoyment, because that ultimately is what this medium is about. It's about going to see a well-made movie, having a really good time, and remembering that movie for a long time, and rewatching it and wishing you could go back to that first time you saw it on the big screen and relive those same feelings. Dune Part 2 will deliver that kind of nostalgia for me in the future. I think it's going to deliver that kind of nostalgia for a lot of people. This is one I'm going to remember for a long time. It's going to be on my shelves. It's going to be in my collector's bin. I'm going to rewatch this movie just as much as I rewatch Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, because it really is one of the greatest movies I have ever seen. It is one of the greatest sci-fi epics I've ever seen. It is one of my new favorite movies of all time when you pair Part 1 and Part 2 together. I don't view them as separate. I won't watch them separately. I won't rank them separately. If I ever put these in like my top 10 favorite movies of all time, it's one movie. They aren't 2 movies, they're one movie. And what they make is a truly extraordinary experience that I'm never ever going to see in the sci-fi genre again in my lifetime, probably. Could be wrong, but honestly, I don't think I am. So I've tried to film this outro a couple times now because there is no perfect movie. Dune Part 2 is no exception. Every movie, no matter how amazing, has a little scene or a little moment that maybe didn't add anything, it didn't really contribute to the movie at all, it felt a little off. There is no start to finish perfect movie. It's ultimately nitpicking, but it's true. And Dune Part 2 is no exception. However, it is a remarkable achievement in the sci-fi genre. It is now one of my favorite movies of all time. It's going to develop such a loving fan base, myself included. It's going to be remembered in 10, 20, 30 years. People are going to rewatch it and wish they could be there when it first came out. And for that reason and that reason alone, I'm giving it 100% essential to your health. This booster shot is vitally necessary. You need to go see this movie, preferably in IMAX. I would say pretty much necessarily in the best possible video format that you can afford or manage or whatever that your theater offers to you, because this is the kind of experience that we do not see very often. We're not going to see for a long time. It is truly one of the greatest films, in my opinion, ever made when you view Part 1 and Part 2 as one movie. And I think it is a movie that you need. If you haven't seen Part 1, watch Part 1 and immediately make your way to a screening of Part 2. I almost guarantee you that you will not regret it. So yeah, that's my review of Dune Part 2. I'm glad I finally got that outro out. That took me a while. Let me know what you thought. Obviously, new angle. A little less editing this time around. A lot more of me. But I am working on my next video. I promise that one has a little more editing in it. I really wanted to get this one out because I had a lot of opinions on it. I really wanted you guys to go see this movie. It really is a fantastic movie. But yeah, I'm working on my next booster shot upload, so I'll let you know how that one's going. I'll get that one out as soon as I can. A little busy right now, but yeah, let me know what you thought in the comments below. Please tell me that you're making your way to Dune Part 2 screening right now if you haven't already seen it, and I will catch you guys later.